Hey there! Welcome to Exposing the Hidden Reality. I'm Annette, career reinvention coach and caffeine-powered human.
And I'm Sandra, women's life and leadership coach. I bring the woo to our conversations.
And this is the podcast where we call out all the unspoken stuff, biases, outdated expectations, and all the things women navigate in work and in life.
Yes. We bring to light what we see happening. Smart, capable women stuck in the same patterns because no one really talks about what's going on.
We'll bring some difficult truths.
Welcome, insightful experts.
And sprinkle in a little chaos and fun.
It wouldn't be us if we didn't, right?
It's true.
So whether you're walking the dog or tuning in during your commute, we're glad you're here. Let's do this.
Let's do this. You want to do the let's do this together? Like 3, 2, 1, let's do this. All right, 3, 2, 1. Let's do this. Welcome. I am so excited about today's conversation. We have a very accomplished, high-achieving woman joining us who's going to talk about her career, her personal life, and how they intersected rather recently. And she came to different perception and understanding of women in general. So Marysol James, welcome so much to the Exposing the Hidden Reality podcast. Why don't you take a little bit of time and tell us more about yourself?
Well, hi. Thank you so much for having me here. And let me just say, I've been on a few podcasts and watched a few introductions, and that is the most sort of energizing, positive introduction. You guys look like so much fun. I would totally, meet you guys for coffee or, I don't know, a cosmopolitan somewhere. But anyway, I'm getting off track already. Sorry. My name's Marysol James. And if anybody has heard of me at all, it's probably as a best-selling romance writer. I've written 32 books over about a 12-year period. And besides that, I am just a sort of a world traveler. I am somebody who speaks 3 languages. I have a background in international business. I'm a mother of 2 amazing boys, and I am the survivor of a very abusive narcissistic relationship that I left 2 years ago. And I have pulled myself out of the wreckage and rebuilt my life. And it was hard work. So that's probably me in a nutshell.
Wow.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Wow. Like where do you go from there?
I mean, we could end right from there if you want to.
Well, I'm launching a new business, so if there's time to talk about that, we can talk about that probably a bit later. But based on my relationship, my abusive relationship that I got out of, I have completely pivoted my life and refocused on something else. So I don't have much to thank him for, but I can thank him for this new heart-led business that I'm now launching and taking part in.
Yeah, that sounds true. And often when we talk to our guests, there's something big that happens to them, a shift that somehow comes about that brings about change. So it sounds like that's similar for you. Is that where you want to start? Do you want us to talk about how you have been a world traveler, how you're an author, and you were leading this big, amazing life, and then this thing happened to you that caused you to shift?
Sure. Yeah, I know as women, we're not supposed to talk about our accomplishments. We're supposed to be humble and modest, but, forget that. No, this is not the show for that. If we're going to celebrate women, we have to do it properly. So I am a very, very high achieving woman. And I suspect you both are, and I suspect that a lot of your listeners are. So I have a master's degree in international business. I have spent over 2 decades in management, upper management,
Mhm.
in China, Hong Kong, and Eastern Europe, mostly Poland. I was based in Poland for a long time, but I was the chief operational director for Eastern Europe. So I
Wow.
actually managed from Poland 3 other countries as well. Um, when I got ill back in Poland, I ended up having to leave management and focus on my recovery. And I guess I just got bored. Plus, I was kind of dared by 2 girlfriends of mine to write a romance as a joke because I was flat on my back and I had nothing but time. And why not? So I wrote a romance in 2 weeks as a joke, really, as a joke. Um, and then they told me to self-publish it on Amazon, which I did, and I forgot about it, sort of. And then money started appearing in my bank account, and it became a best-selling beach read that summer. So then I had to get on Facebook because this was back when Facebook was the
Was
thing.
the thing. Yeah.
And suddenly I had followers and they were
Wow.
saying, "Where's book 2?" And I'm thinking, "What book? There is no book 2, right? Like there was barely a book 1. This was just a joke." But I wrote book 2. It became a bestseller. And then I got tired of the cowboys, which was the theme of my
Okay.
series, Sexy Cowboys. So then I started writing about MMA fighters. And then I got tired of them and I started writing about like ex-military bodyguards. And that third series, the Unseen Enemy series, was the one where my books weren't just best-selling, but I was a best-selling writer, like a top 100 writer on Amazon.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it just launched me into a whole new career, which I went along with. So I sort of left management at that point and became a full-time romance writer. And that's what I was doing until about 6 years ago when I moved from Poland to England to be with my ex. And then that's when everything fell apart, just utterly fell apart, sort of on every level. So that's my background for who I was before I got into this relationship.
Okay, so you had a huge pivot anyways. You were in the corporate world, leading big teams, leading huge territories and regions, and then you had an injury, which then got you writing. I love that your girlfriends dared you to write it and that you
They
did.
did. They did.
I can totally see that happening to Sandra or myself. So, and then you had this big author life. And what was that like? Or, I mean, you're still an author, right? You've written how many books?
Well, I've written 32 books,
Wow.
and it's kind of, if you look at the numbers, it's very indicative of what happened to me because I've written 32 books in total,
Okay.
and I wrote 26 of those in 6 years when I was still living in Poland with my like ex-husband and my 2 boys. So when I was living in Poland, I wrote 26 books, including this best-selling series, the one that catapulted me, the
Yeah.
one that was actually put onto audiobook professionally. But anyway, so I wrote 26 books in 6 years. And then I moved to England to move in with my ex, this
Mhm.
boyfriend of mine, and I lived with him for 4 years. In 4 years, now remember 26 books, 6 years when I wasn't living with him.
Yeah.
In 4 years living with him, I wrote 2 books. 2,
Whoa.
which means I didn't write 18 books because I was averaging about 5 books a year if you think about it, right? And if I wrote 2 books in 4 years, it means I didn't write 18 books, right? Because
Yeah.
it was, I was sabotaged, I was guilted. I was actually working for his company for free, like no paycheck. Just
Oh,
yeah, but the thing is, it was like the bills were paid and the rent was paid, and that was kind of considered my payment, right? But
I see.
and a part of you sort of thinks, well, that makes sense, right? Like the company is, I'm working for the company and the company is paying the rent. So it's kind of like I'm being paid. But when you aren't getting an actual deposit into your bank account, you
Mhm.
lose your financial independence incredibly quickly. And I didn't realize how quickly my royalties would crash, because what kept my royalties going was the constant publishing schedule. And when I stopped publishing, because I just couldn't, I mean, it was not even worth having the conversation after a certain point, because his reaction was so extreme and so abusive. I just shut up and thought, well, I'll get back to it one day. And then when I left him 2 years ago, I've since written two more books.
Okay.
So, but I've kind of, because of this experience, I haven't gone off romance, and I certainly haven't gone off writing, but it's just refocused me on something different that I want to do now.
Mhm.
So, writing, I love writing, and I love my romance books. Actually, all those books behind me are my books. Now that I'm looking, it's behind me.
Okay.
And I'm really proud of that history of romance writing. But I think it's just something that I'm well, as a writer, I'm on a new chapter. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So, one of the things you said that I think is really telling, and perhaps a question that women who find themselves maybe not in the exact same position, but similar positions, where I'll come back to it eventually.
Mm.
It's not worth it to have the argument.
Mm.
Talk a little bit about kind of where you were at and kind of how you moved or shifted out of that.
Well, at the time, I suppose, I mean, if you think about where I was coming from, I mean, I had all these best-selling books. I had a huge fan base. I was self-published, so I wasn't sort of beholden to a publishing house or an editor or an agent. I was my own boss, pretty much.
Yeah.
So I think that gave me this sense of security, like I can go back to it anytime, because
Mm.
why wouldn't I be able to go back to it?
Right.
So that was one part of my thinking, was I'm well established enough and I'm well known enough. Surely, if, the people will buy whatever I give them. Surely they won't go anywhere, right? But
Right.
that's not how things work, especially in the world of self-published romance, where, especially during that 4 years where I was so out of the game, self-publishing exploded, just exploded. And romance became a legitimate genre in terms of attracting writers. So I was pushed out incredibly quickly, but I didn't know that until my royalties went off a cliff. Like, I didn't actually understand what was happening. But when you're in a relationship with somebody who's emotionally and mentally and physically abusive, your entire existence becomes about um, you become hypervigilant,
Mm.
and you start to scan your environment for danger all the time. Like, you never relax. And so your entire life becomes about anticipating what's coming, hoping to, like, head it off at the pass, right? Trying really hard to make sure that the situation doesn't escalate or get worse. And it's impossible, because when you're with an abusive person, it doesn't matter what you do. If they are going to escalate, it's going to happen. And then you spend all this time trying to manage the other person's emotions and behaviors and patterns, and you completely lose yourself. And before you know it, every day is exactly the same in your head, which is, what do I do today to make sure that um, things are calm, things are safe, things are stable, and
Mm.
everything else kind of falls away. So I think that what I was doing at that time was, I was just in survival mode, and I was trying to protect my son as well, because he was there. So anything to do with my writing became very alien, like, it became very distant and far from me, because I couldn't get out of my own head, and I couldn't get beyond trying to foresee what he was going to do and then manage it. So when that happens, everything becomes about keeping the peace, everything. So you actually, this, when women talk about losing themselves, I think this is part of what we mean, is that
Mhm.
our whole existence is about trying to keep everybody else on a certain equilibrium. And we just lose any voice we have, any independence we have, any dreams we have, any gifts or talents we have. All of this is just pushed aside to keep the abusive person quiet and happy. Because if they're quiet and happy, you have some peace. But of course, it's all an illusion, right? Because
Right.
it's peace ruled by fear. You're too afraid to speak up, or you're too afraid to speak back. And so that's not really peace at all. That's self, muting and self sabotage in a way. You're betraying yourself to keep someone
Mhm.
else happy. And that's what I did. That's what happened to me.
I think it's interesting because you're talking about a particular individual and a particular relationship. But I would think that, Annette in particular, I know I do, we see this often in relationships to jobs. I can't leave. I,
Yeah.
I have a certain amount of flexibility with the job that I'm in. I don't want to put that at risk. There are other things that I'm trying to do, be, accomplish, support. And if I put this other thing at risk, I no longer have that option. Um, and I think maybe Annette, you can speak to this a little bit better, but I think it is such a woman thing.
Mhm. I do. I agree. I think we tend to set, maybe I would call it the real us or the real me, right? You tend to put that person on a shelf to manage all the things that you have to. And in your case, an abusive relationship caused you to put your real self, your joy, your writing on a shelf so that you could manage everything else around you. And yes, women do it with work, with family. If they take a sabbatical from working to care for the family, um, it's hard to be your full faceted self when you're managing such toxicity in one area of your life.
No, absolutely. And I think this thing that women do, I mean, I did it when I became a mother as well. I kind of
Mhm.
thought, I'll get back to my traveling, I'll get back to my independence, I'll get back to all of that. But for right now, this is what I need to do. And it feels very either or, I
Mm.
think, as a woman, either we're totally free and totally independent and totally just being ourselves, our most fulfilled selves,
Yeah.
or we're a mother, or we're an employee, or we're a wife, or we're a girlfriend. It's like we as women seem to struggle with um, being multifaceted like a diamond. We seem to struggle with that. And I don't know if it's because we're expected to totally commit to whatever role we've chosen to take on. And if we're a high achieving woman, we feel very responsible for whatever role we've taken on. We take
Mhm.
accountability for our decisions, we commit to things, we set goals, we do our part to move things forward, whether it's part of a team at work or part of a family unit, we're
Mhm.
committed. And I think we just get very bogged down by the things that we commit to. And then if we don't do it, well, then we failed at it. Rather than saying, I need to take a more measured approach to this, we say, God, I suck. I totally
Mhm.
failed as a mother, as a wife, as an employee, as a boss, whatever. And I think we're really hard on ourselves that way. I think we have to give ourselves more grace.
Yes, I completely agree. I think we have to do that for ourselves. When you found yourself in this situation about 4 years ago, where you were in a relationship that wasn't exactly what you thought it would be, um, did you find yourself talking? Was your inner critic talking like that to you? Like, what are you doing? Put yourself on hold. What was going on for you? Because you said earlier to Sandra and I separately, there was some shame.
Mm.
in the relationship you found yourself in? And where do you think that came from?
Well, the shame, there were actually two, I guess we call versions of shame that I
Yeah.
experienced. And the first one was while I was in the relationship. And then the second one came after I was out of the relationship. And I guess we would put it under the umbrella of shame,
Mhm.
but there were different motivations and reasons for it. So when I was in the relationship, and it was, I mean, bear in mind, we're talking about a narcissist here, which is a different beast than just a guy who's kind of a jerk,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
a narcissist is an actual pattern of behavior and a certain toxic dynamic that no matter what you do, these cycles, and they're very well documented cycles, repeat. And if you've never been in this kind of relationship before, which I hadn't, I didn't know what I was dealing with. I mean, I was like a lamb to the slaughter for this guy. I had no idea what I was dealing with at all. I'd never. So bear in mind that for the first 2 years of our 6 year relationship, we were long distance. I was still in Poland and he was in England. So it was very easy for
Mm.
him to maintain this love bombing fairy tale, man of my dreams thing.
Yeah.
But I thought I was getting to know the real him. I didn't know that this person for the first 2 years was a complete mirage. I didn't know that. But I was so convinced that he was sort of the perfect man for me
Yeah.
that I actually moved my son over to England with me. Like I brought my son into the situation, and I would never have done that if I thought for 1 minute that this man was abusive or unsafe or even like wearing a mask. Like if I thought this guy wasn't the real guy, I would never put my son, let alone myself, in this situation.
Yeah.
So the first 2 years is like a fairy tale. It's like a fantasy. As somebody who's written romance, you could kind of go, yeah, like fated, destined, the best guy ever. But once he kind of got my son and I here to England and we all moved in together, and then COVID happened. So then we were actually locked in together, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was like something flipped inside of him. And I know now it's called the unmasking, but at the time I was so confused. I could not understand where this amazing man from the beginning of the relationship had gone. Like, who was this guy? I had never seen this guy. And of course, it's easy to dismiss this kind of behavior when you're in a pandemic because everybody's tense, everybody's on edge, nobody's really themselves. It's not a normal circumstance. So it was very easy for me to dismiss his temper and
Mhm.
his shouting and his acting out and all of these things as stress because he had his own small business and it was a very bad time for small businesses, you
Yes.
know?
Right.
So this is when I started working for his company for free because I wanted to support him, right?
Sure.
Um, and so there's the shame came in when I had been there a while and things were getting back to normal and the world was opening up again and his business was back on track. And I wanted to get back to writing. I wanted to get back to my thing. And there was so much pressure and guilt and like, why aren't you supporting my dream? Like, why is it always about you? Like, do you not care that without you, I can't do this business without you? Like, do you not care? And the Grand Canyon between this guy from the beginning and this guy that he had become, I
Mhm.
was so like, why am I putting up with this? But the bigger question was, what have I done wrong that has made this guy from the beginning disappear? Because
Oh,
he made it clear it was my fault. He made it clear that it was me, right? And again, as a high achieving woman, you tend to take feedback on board. Like if somebody says something to you, you take it as feedback that's supposed to be constructive and helpful and coming from a good place. So here's this man who says he loves me, who says he loves my son, who I think I love. And he's telling me something. And I'm thinking, well, there must be some truth to it. Otherwise, why would he say it? So clearly, I'm the problem here. So back to your question about shame, when you're in this kind of abusive relationship, you feel a lot of shame about why you're such a really crappy partner. Like, why you're so bad at this. Why can't you just make this work? Why have you driven the man from the beginning away? Like, why? Like, what's wrong with you? Of course, what you realize when you're out of it and with a little bit of education and therapy is you realize that it was never you, ever. But at the time, you don't know that. So
Sure.
there's a lot of shame when you're in this kind of relationship that you're doing something so wrong and you can't figure out what it is. And you try everything and nothing works. And again, you're a failure. You're a failure at what was supposed to be the best relationship of your life. So you don't talk to anybody about it because you're so embarrassed that you're just such a lousy partner. And this keeps you locked in and isolated and stuck. So that was the shame I felt in the relationship, definitely.
You talked as well about there was a different shame after you left, and I would have, if I were to guess, I would say it's why did I stay so long?
Part of it, yeah,
Mhm.
hugely. I mean, when you get out of it and the fog kind of lifts and you can see the train again, like you've lost the tunnel vision and you can see beyond their needs and their moods or whatever, and you're sort of free and clear. There is this sense of why did I let myself get treated like that? Like I always swore I would never. How did I end up in this? And so there's the shame for that. But then the bigger shame that I felt anyway, and a lot of the women that I talk to and that I work with now, the much bigger shame is when we start to talk about this and tell people, they look at us and say, well, why did you put up with that? I mean, you have a master's degree, you're well traveled, you're very successful at work, you're smart. Why did you how did you fall for this? And then you think, wow, why? How did I? And then it's worse because there's this sense that the victims of domestic abuse are what? We're supposed to be weak, we're supposed to be uneducated, we're supposed to be like just these kind of women who, we don't have any power. And when you're the exact opposite of all of that and you're still a victim, there's this sense that you're a total imposter. Because if you were truly strong, how would you be a victim? If you were truly successful, how would you have fallen into this? If you were truly a leader, how would you have ended up in this position in the first place? So there's this whole sort of catastrophic domino effect that happens where you finally get out of it one way or the other.
Yeah.
You realize what you've been through. You realize it was actually abuse. Then you try to share that with people. And the reaction is, wow, I thought you were smarter than that. So then this other layer of shame of, wow, like not just how could I have been so stupid, but also now I can't tell anybody because they're going to think I was so stupid. And it's such a damaging, horrible way to feel about yourself because none of this was your fault. You were targeted, you were sucked in, you were lied to by a manipulator. It's not like he showed up as this manipulative, abusive person on the first date. I mean, in my case, I didn't see anything for 2.5 years. By that point, I was in love with him. I had moved countries. I had brought my son. And when he started to reveal who he truly was, I didn't think, oh, he's abusive. I thought, oh, I'm doing something wrong in this relationship. Like it's not him, it's me. So it's a complicated way to feel about a lot of things.
So I love what you said about it's challenging to talk about, and it didn't start this way. So I want to put two things on the table. The first one is I attended a resilience class ages ago, and the professor said, you don't just get thrown into into a boiling pot because you'll jump out just like the lobsters do. It's that you are sitting in this pot and it's constantly warming up. And one day the water is so hot But by then you've kind of like, you've fallen asleep, or you're like, the whole point is it doesn't start that way, right? Because if it started that way, you would have dealt with it.
Right.
It's this investment that you've made, whether it's a job, a relationship, or the situation that you're in. You've made an investment, and suddenly, had you been thrown into that now, you would say, no, I'm out of here. But because of that time, you're looking at it differently. So that's one idea. And then the other idea is there's another angle of talking about it. And that is that some people say, it's just a mindset shift. You just need to get out of it, without recognizing, no, there are actually safety issues that we need to talk about here, right? And you can't just go to somebody and say and admit to what's happening and have them say to you, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to get out, you need to, do all these other things, without recognizing that the person's in a situation where they might actually be in danger. And implementing these things can actually make the situation worse. And so we have to be cognizant that when we're sharing our story, right, people are holding space for us in a way that allows us to decide what's right for us, not in a way that makes us feel more shame about why are we still here.
What you said is interesting about the lobster in the pot, or the frog in the pot, where they're putting cold water and they're happy and they're swimming and it's wonderful. And then the pot is slowly, like the heat is turned up gradually. And before they know it, they're literally boiling to death and they haven't noticed. And that is one of the most baffling things for me to look back on now, is when I think of how it was at the end, when I finally kind of cracked and left and stuck with it this time. Like, he begged for another chance and the answer was no. Like, I was just done, When I think of how it began and how I felt at the end, I adapted over that 4-year period. Like, every boundary push, I adapted to it. Every sort of thing taken away from me, I adapted. Everything that he went back on or he lied about, or every temper tantrum, everything he threw. He even, turned physical at one point, and he's permanently damaged my shoulder. I was actually at the chiropractor earlier today because I have to go for treatment on my shoulder just to have mobility. But everything was just a little bit more, a little bit higher, a little bit more heat. And because of everything that I had adapted to before that, it didn't feel like an extreme. It was a tiny adjustment. It was tiny, it was minuscule. But when you look back on it in total, it's monstrous. Like, it's monstrous what happens. So adaptation to abuse, when abuse becomes normal, when that level of stress becomes normal, when living in survival mode is your normal, then not being in that situation feels abnormal, which is why so many victims go back to their abusers. It's not because they're weak or they're pathetic. It's because the peace they feel, the quiet, the calm, they can't deal with that because that doesn't feel like home anymore. They've become so used to the chaos and the drama and the insecurity and the unpredictability. Everything after that feels boring. It feels dull. It feels in its own way unsafe, because you're actually waiting for, like, where's the thunderbolt going to come from? Like, there's this constant feeling of you're waiting for something to hit you, and it just doesn't. So you're living in a holding pattern. So it's actually easier to go back to the chaos because you can settle into it like the warm bath, and it's familiar. So you can actually get used to being boiled to death. You can actually, your body and your brain chemistry will actually adjust to it. And it's terrifying when I think about sort of how low I got in my mind and my spirit. Um, it's stunning to me now because it's been 2 years. But at
Yeah.
that time, that was my reality. Being that
Yes.
low and that helpless was my normal. And it's just shocking to think about it now. But having somebody tell me, well, you should have known better, does not help. It's not a constructive conversation to have at all, at any point, ever, with somebody.
And I would say that the pattern that you just described about the dysregulation, the emotional dysregulation you feel when you're out of the situation, and the desire to get back into that because at least I don't feel as bad as I do right now being out of it. That's exactly, I would say, not to the extreme, but certainly I would say that is why Annette probably sees people who end up with the same boss and
Yes.
the different company, and they move to a new job, but they're still experiencing the same things because we're attracted to those things that we know, even though they're not necessarily good for us.
I would
They
love
feel
to hear about
comfortable.
that, Annette, because I would say that people repeat patterns in all aspects of their life,
Yes.
Yes.
including professional. So do you see that where people kind of end up with the same boss over and over?
Yeah, same boss or same situation. And I like to think that it's a little bit because that situation feels familiar. And even though I swear to goodness I'm going to go into this new job and be different, I tend to gravitate towards these situations that, like you were saying, feel like home, feel like a comfortable sweater. And really, they're not. They're the thing we should absolutely be turning, standing up and turning 180 and running from. And you had an interesting concept too about how the workforce or the workplace or corporate doesn't support
Hmm.
these women in these relationships such as you found yourself in. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you feel we can make a difference in that?
It's a great question. And when I talked about how I've kind of taken a pivot in my
Yeah.
professional life, this is what I've done. Like I said, after I left him, I went into 6 months of complete hibernation. Like I shut down, I healed, I sat on my sofa and read and looked at the garden, and I drank too much coffee and all the rest of it. And then I tried to go back to writing. And I just didn't feel the same way about it. I didn't have the same passion and energy for it. And then I thought, oh God, well, I'm a failure at that as well. I just suck all over the place. But then I started talking openly on podcasts
Mhm.
about narcissistic abuse. And the feedback I was getting from women, like they were contacting me individually,
Yeah.
and they were saying, thank you for talking about it. I'm a lawyer, I'm a nurse, I'm a therapist. You wouldn't believe how many therapists end
Yes.
up in narcissistic relationships. Like it's amazing. I'm a doctor, I'm an accountant, I'm this, I'm that. Um, I'm 20 years out of my narcissistic marriage and I can't make it go with any relationship. Like just all these stories. And I thought, well, maybe, I mean, I'm looking for a new business idea, something to do. Maybe I should, start doing programs for women who are recovering from like high achieving women recovering from narcissistic abuse. So we can have a whole conversation about shame and societal expectations. And I was doing that for a little while, kind of working with women one on one. But what I realized is there's a bigger picture, there's a bigger conversation, which is high achieving women, by definition, are high performing women, which
Mhm.
means they are women who have incredible roles in leadership in business. They are the backbone of so many companies. We lead teams. We mentor younger women. We show up for our companies. Like we bring money into the businesses. Like we're players as high achieving, high performing women. And what I've discovered is that high achieving women are targeted by narcissists. Narcissists don't go for the low hanging fruit. They go for the woman who's the shiniest, who makes them look best. And this is something that I go into great detail in my programs, but basically, high achieving women attract narcissists. They
Wow.
love them. They love us. And so if we look at some statistics, which is that 1 in 2 women, 50% of women, and I actually think this number is low, but officially, 50% of women will end up in an abusive relationship at some point in their lives. So if you look at a workplace and you look at the women, you figure half of those women have been abused. It's more. How many of them are being abused right this minute? And if it's domestic abuse, what are the chances that she's going to talk to somebody about it, especially if it's something like what I went through, where
Right.
you're convinced that it's all your fault anyway, right? Like you're being so manipulated and so abused that you think you're the problem. So then you're showing up in the workplace and you're supposed to lead, you're supposed to perform, you're supposed to mentor, you're supposed to be at your best. And it's impossible. Like I can tell you what her headspace is because it was my headspace. And all I could see was, how do I stop him from escalating? Or what's waiting for me when I get home tonight? Or when he would pull up and I would hear the door slam, like the car door, I could tell by the slam if he was in a terrible mood. And if he was, I knew what my evening was like. So I would dread him coming home. Now, and that's just a snapshot into how my mind was for 4 years. That's just a click. Now imagine your female leader showing up to lead your team of 50, 300 people, having that in her head. You can't tell me that it's not impacting her work. It's
Right.
not impacting her decisions. Of course it does. So it occurred to me that there's a bigger conversation, which is why are companies, and I can only really talk about the UK,
Yeah.
but based on my conversations with women like you, I know it's international. Like, why are companies in the UK why don't they have a domestic abuse policy? Like,
Mhm.
why is it not? I did some research. So 1 in 2 women experience abuse. Um, in the UK, 5% of UK companies have a domestic abuse HR policy. 5%. 95% don't even talk about it. It doesn't exist. Um, Something like 1.3 billion pounds a year is lost to domestic abuse in the UK. And that's everything from absenteeism to
Mhm.
presenteeism to women the leaders just not performing. They just can't perform. They don't offer ideas. They don't take promotions. They don't show up really anymore. So I decided that getting to the women one-on-one is one thing, but the bigger conversation to have is with the companies themselves, the boards, the HR directors, the chief people officers, and to explain to them that this is an actual societal problem.
Mm.
And I can promise them that right now there are women running their companies who are going through what I went through, and they are completely unsupported. And it is a massive problem here, huge, yet it is just not discussed. So this is what I'm doing now is I'm actually going on big stages now, like doing live speaking at leadership conferences aimed at women. And I'm talking about not just the financial hit, but also the cost to the women individually and how them being so sort of beaten down and abused at home, how it carries over into the workplace. And it has a legitimate, like monetary hit to companies and the economy. And companies just they don't want to have this conversation, but they have to. It's time.
I have this conversation often, and I frame it from the perspective of trauma informed,
Mm,
um, and recognizing the signs when someone has been triggered, and the importance of making sure that our managers are trauma informed. because often we respond to the trauma as it's about me rather than the person is having a trauma experience and getting them the support that they need to deal with the trauma situation that they are reliving, but also recognizing our own trauma responses so that we're not behaving from a place of trauma, but rather that we're behaving from a place of how do I become re-regulated and what support do I need? And of course, when you talk from a corporate perspective, it creates a gray line because now you're into something that's not really work related. And I'm like, but it is work related because they're making decisions, they're leading teams, they're impacting your bottom line. And so it's how do you shift and frame that conversation to recognize that we're not asking managers to be therapists. We're not asking managers to get into the nitty-gritty of what's happening in a person's life, but we are asking managers to notice in themselves and in their teams when there might be an opportunity to refer them to the kind of support that they need so that they can lead better.
And it's always interesting, like one company that I've talked to just locally here in Nottingham, I've just said, you know, when your female leadership starts to sort of flame out a little bit, like you notice these differences and she's not performing at the highest level. I said, in the past, kind of how have you dealt with that? And they said, well, you know, we just assumed it was burnout. We just gave her kind of a lousy performance review. I said, well, what happened? And they said, well, she kind of handed in her resignation, like she left. And I said, has it ever occurred to you to figure out why your female leadership is leaving? Like you hired her because she was so extraordinary. And then suddenly she just wasn't. I mean, that doesn't make any logical sense. And they said, well, we didn't really think about it. And I said, well, it would probably be really helpful for you, you know, to look at your female leadership, your management and your teams. And if people are not, if there's been a switch, if there's been a change, you might want to ask yourself, what's going on? Because that is how she will cope with it. She will just hand in her resignation. She'll just disappear. Or one man I was talking to, he's working with me on this in terms of promotion. And he said, you know, ever since I started talking to you, he said, I was thinking about this woman I used to work with. She was my boss and she was amazing, but everybody knew she had problems at home. This is what we call it, right? Problems at home.
Right.
And her whole performance just like went down and she just stagnated and she was like shunted sideways and somebody was promoted over her and she quit because she couldn't deal with the embarrassment of being like promoted but actually demoted, if you think about it. And he said to me, I think there was a whole lot more going on. It was showing up in the workplace as like lack of professionalism and efficiency, and like she something was wrong. She was slipping. She was losing her edge. And he said, you know what? It's been 5 years. He said, now I'm just really worried about her, you know? And I say to companies, just look back over the past 5 years. Look at your female leadership. Who's disappeared? Why? When? Has it ever occurred to you? Did you see anything? Like maybe she was offered an amazing job and she left for an opportunity. That's possible. But there are signs. And if she just hands in her resignation sort of out of the blue, it probably wasn't out of the blue. And this isn't something they think about ever. And you kind of think, how do you not? But it's just not a conversation. Like I said, 5% of companies here even have a conversation about domestic abuse and how it impacts the workplace, which means 95% of the companies here in the UK don't even acknowledge it as an issue.
Yeah. And I think we might also be back to that shame. So we judge other women, their performance, what we perceive to be their performance, instead of extending a hand and saying, hey, what's happening and how can we best support you? We just let them go. And yeah, That's alarming to think about. Yeah, I'm thinking about people I've worked with in the past, great people, and all of a sudden they're not as engaged or they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
It happens almost out of nowhere. Not that it happened for her out of nowhere, but as the employer or the workplace colleague, it happens out of nowhere. And now I am going to think differently about that for darn sure.
I was at my book club. I do a book club the second Wednesday of every month, and I was talking to the woman who runs it now.
Yeah.
And she was asking me about what I do, and I was telling her a little bit. And she just looked at me and she said, she said, we had a woman, she works for a company that has a large warehouse.
Yeah.
And she said this woman worked in the warehouse and she had a restraining order against her husband, and everybody knew.
Yeah.
And the husband was showing up at the warehouse parking lot, like looking for her. And the police were called, and the parking lot security company, they have a private company, they got involved. And so everybody knew that this woman was dealing with a problem at home, but the guy was showing up at her workplace. Like he was actively breaking a restraining order to get to her. And everybody knew this. The police were there, everything. And it's interesting because something like 80% of survivors of domestic abuse report that the abuse follows them into the workplace. Either, phone, right? Like you can get to somebody 24/7, email, through another coworker, or they physically show up. Like
Right.
they are literally targeted at their workplace. Anyway, this woman, and nobody from HR or management like stepped in to take her aside and say, let's talk about what's going on. Are you okay? Are you safe? Nothing. One day she just didn't come to work. No call, no nothing, just didn't show up. Took 3 days for anybody from management to think, you know what, maybe we should check on her. So this woman from my book club was telling me that finally, after 3 days, people said, huh, maybe we should, see if she's all right. Couldn't find her. The police got involved. They found her body about 2 months later, and she had been killed by her husband. And it's one of these situations where you're like, do you need a gigantic sign with lights? Do you know, like, how did you not see this coming?
Yeah.
The police didn't take it seriously. The workplace did nothing to support her. And, this is what happened. This is how things ended up for her. And I said to this woman from the book club, I said, has there been any change in your workplace? You'd think this is a wake up call. And she said, yeah, like the day after we got the news about how she'd been murdered, they had a therapist come in and sit in a room for 6 hours and said, if anybody wants to talk about this to help process, the therapist is here for 6 hours. And that was it. That was the company response. And I'm thinking, really? Like you didn't take away a single nothing about responsibility to your employees or putting safety protocols, like nothing?
Nothing.
I'm thinking, wow, like you've literally had an employee murdered by somebody who trespassed on property that you own, and you still don't think maybe you should be reaching out to your female staff? No? Okay. Like, what do you do with that kind of mentality from a business? Like, if you know the answer, I'd love to hear it, but I don't think I know.
No.
It's shocking. I can think of several examples just here in the Cleveland area,
Right.
that echo what you've just talked about. Marysol, this is such an important conversation. Such an important conversation, not just for our listeners, but for all women. And honestly, for all men, because we tend to think of, we don't tend to think of men as their fathers, their brothers, right? So how can people get a hold of you if they want to continue this conversation?
The best way is through my website, which is marysoljamescoaching.com. And that's the best way to get a hold of me. I'm also appearing at a lot of summits, a lot of them virtual. And I'm also on a lot of stages. I'm going to be in London next month on stage for the National Women's Leadership Conference. In November, I'm going up to Scotland to do 2 workshops at the Scottish Women's Wellness Summit. Next week, I'm speaking at the London Stock Exchange to their women virtually. And I just got invited to a couple more summits, one in November, which is a very woman-focused, sort of rising from the ashes summit. And then more of an AI summit about overcoming obstacles in your business. So how I went from sort of realizing that I was a failed romance writer to this new pivot that I've taken. So sometimes when it feels like things are just not going to go any which way and you don't know what to do now, sometimes a new opportunity comes along that you just never saw coming. So probably that's the best way to get a hold of me. And then on my website, I list all the summits and podcasts I'm on in my media section. So if you want to find me and see me in person, all that information is there as well.
Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure to speak with you and to connect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap on this episode of Exposing the Hidden Reality. If something hit home or made you snort laugh, tell us.
Seriously, we love hearing from you. Message us, tag us, or send us coffee. We love coffee.
And hey, leave a review. It helps more women find us and boosts our egos.
Which are like fragile, like suspiciously fragile.
True. All right, until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and if all else fails,
blame the dog.
See you next time. Wait, did we stop recording?
No, we're still here. You have to push the red button.
Red button. Cool. Just eternal podcasting.
Bye.
Bye.